Tonight, breaking news. In the last few minutes, one of Israel's most senior politicians, Benny Gantz, has resigned from the war cabinet. Here in the UK, senior Conservatives come out to defend Rishi Sunak, insist he won't quit before polling day.
Is he going to lead you into this election?
There should be, absolutely, and there should be no question of anything other than that.
Prime Minister back on the campaign trail, but still not speaking to the media. One Conservative commentator tells Sky News his D-Day gaffe was the worst in political memory. Keir Starmer makes a triple lock pledge not to increase tax, but there's no similar guarantee for public services.
Are you worried about the far right, Chancellor? Are you worried about the far right in this election?
The vote's already being counted for the European Parliament, and the right look poised to make gains. And who gets the fire juggler vote in this election? We've been to the Shambles in York to find out.
Seems a predetermined outcome. Basically, one side committing constant errors and the other side not doing anything.
And breathing fire of their own, Luciana Berger and Joe Tanner, who will be with me for the next hour. It's Sunday, I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Well, we start this evening with breaking news. In the last few minutes, Benny Gantz has announced that he will stand down from the Israeli war cabinet. He said that Benjamin Netanyahu's political considerations are impeding decisions in the war in Gaza and called on the Israeli Prime Minister to set an election date. Well, our international correspondent Alex Rossi is in Jerusalem for us this evening. This press conference, I think, is ongoing. Alex, tell us a bit about what he's been saying.
Well, this was an ultimatum delivered by Benny Gantz, who's a centrist opposition leader in Israel. He joined the unity government on the 11th of October, so a few days after the 7th of October, and he's been part of the war cabinet, part of the unity government ever since. But you know, there's been much speculation about the level of falling out between him and Prime Minister Netanyahu over the last few months. There's rumours that the two no longer speak, but certainly he set down this ultimatum that if by June the 8th, Netanyahu hadn't set out a plan for what happens in Gaza for when the fighting stops, and a real plan to bring all of the hostages back, there are 120 hostages still in Gaza, then he would quit the government. Now, originally he was going to speak yesterday. Then we heard that very dramatic news that the Israeli military had rescued 4 hostages from inside central Gaza, and it was postponed. But he has just spoken in a televised address, looking very prime ministerial himself, something of a pitch, really, I think, to be the next prime minister of Israel. He blamed Netanyahu for playing politics with this war, putting his own ambitions and needs first. He also called on Netanyahu to set a date for elections. He said only by altruism, by putting the country first, can this war, he described the war with Hamas and what's going on in the north of Israel, of course, with Hezbollah, as an existential threat to the state of Israel. And he said only by coming together and actually not putting yourself first can Israel get through this and overcome it. So, you know, a big body blow there. Very, very critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu. What does it mean, Ali, materially? It doesn't mean a huge amount in terms of the mechanics of governance for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Certainly in the short term, what happens now is the government reverts back to how it was prior to October the 7th. He enjoys a majority of 64 MPs, the members of the Knesset, 120 MKs altogether in the Israeli Knesset, so he can carry on governing. But Benny Gantz lent credibility to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The fact that it was a unity government as well also protected Netanyahu from a certain amount of international flack, in the sense that he could say, you know, we're acting in the spirit and unity of a nation. But now Netanyahu is alone with a campaign in Gaza which is increasingly getting bogged down in a government which has been described as the most far-right government, the most right-wing government in Israel's history. And he effectively now owns everything that's happening in Gaza.
OK, Alex Rossi, thanks so much for joining us on the breaking news this evening that Benny Gantz The Israeli war minister has resigned. He says he does so with a heavy heart. Well, back to British politics then, and it has been quite a week that has ended today with a minister being forced to confirm Rishi Sunak won't resign in the middle of a general election campaign. Campaigns do have their bad moments. Politicians do make mistakes. Rishi Sunak's decision to leave D-Day early, undoubtedly seen by many as a pretty bad one. But the question then is, who steadies the ship? Does the Prime Minister double down and be seen to do more, try to grip the moment himself? Or does he pull back and do less? And it feels like the latter is what we've seen this weekend. Rishi Sunak has not spoken to the media once. That is not sustainable. Next week, he will need to, not least on Sky News's debate, Rishi Sunak will need to show this coming week if he's really a fighter or if he's a quitter. Sky's political correspondent Sarina Barker-Singh has tonight's first report.
Getting out and about in an election is usually the norm for party leaders. For Keir Starmer, this was today in Thurrock, announcing the latest on his plans to crack down on antisocial behaviour.
So what have we got here?
For the Prime Minister, a very different approach. No interviews, no media access really for almost 24 hours. Only this, photographs sent to us to prove he was indeed door-knocking in Yorkshire this morning. And a minister sent out to explain the decision to leave a D-Day ceremony early.
The Prime Minister has accepted that he made a mistake. He has apologised unequivocally for that, and I think he will be feeling this personally very deeply, because he's a deeply patriotic person.
Is he going to lead you into this election?
There should be, absolutely, and there should be no question of anything other than that.
Though no question, too, the deep divisions in his party.
I'm very struck by the change in conversation since the D-Day thing, which is probably the biggest gaffe I can remember in politics.
I'm not sure we expected the Tories to evidence that chaos and division every day of the campaign.
Labour are all too happy to reiterate their attack line on the Conservatives. Tax rises are what they have had to defend in turn.
Now, the IFS say politicians need to be honest about whether it's cuts to public services or tax rises. So I'm just wondering if you think you're being honest.
Well, let me be absolutely clear. We will not raise tax for working people. So that means we will not raise income tax, national insurance or VAT, because all of our plans are fully costed and fully funded, and none of them require tax rises over and above the ones that we've already announced. But look, no, we're not going to austerity. I ran a public service for 5 years. We are not returning to austerity. What we want to return to is growth in the economy.
Independent forecasters say growth will have to be miraculous to avoid any hard choices. But some details will have to be revealed next week as manifestos launch, and the promises parties made lurch one step closer to reality. Sarina Barker-Singh, Sky News.
Well, Sky's John Craig is with us now, something of an election veteran.
Number 11.
Number 11. Well, you can tell us then, with great authority, how bad is all this for Rishi Sunak?
Some people have said, including Nigel Farage, that this is like Gillian Duffy with Gordon Brown back in 2010, when he called her a bigoted woman. But this is different. This is not an accident where he left his mic on, or John Prescott's punch, or Kinnock falling over on the beach and stuff. This is more serious because it's bad planning, bad judgment. Now, you could argue Michael Foot's donkey jacket in 1981 at the Cenotaph. Now, what happened there, that became a story because a Labour MP, Walter Johnson, who was Margaret Beckett's predecessor in Derby South, said he looked like an out-of-work navvy. So that was something, obviously, that Mr Foot could have done differently, although he did say it wasn't really a donkey jacket. But this is just terrible judgment by the Prime Minister and the teenage scribblers, as Ken Clarke used to call them, who worked for him inside Number 10, most of whom, of course, have been carpet-bagging off to save seats during the election and perhaps not paying attention. Terrible judgment. Lord Cameron, David Cameron as was, in 2014, in his Tory conference speech, said that that was the most enjoyable thing that happened that year, the 70th anniversary he and Sam, his wife, went to. So there are questions, I suppose, about why David Cameron didn't say to Rishi Sunak, no, don't go. Terrible judgment by the Prime Minister.
And you've been speaking to the party chairman, Richard Holden.
Well, what an interview. It was actually on behalf of the broadcasting pool, other broadcasters as well. And, of course, you get the chance to ask about anything at all. Now, you'll hear that he wanted to talk about a certain subject. I wanted to ask him about his selection in Basildon and Billericay, which looks like a terrible stitch-up. Why? How does he justify that? Have a listen. Let's start with you. How can you justify yourself, chairman of the Conservative Party, being parachuted into a safe seat 300 miles or so from your old constituency, shortlist of one, not the normal 3 or more, just a day or so before nominations close? How do you answer the charge? It just looks like an appalling stitch-up, and you're part of a self-serving elite.
This interview is about Emily Thornberry's comments today, and when she admitted that it's going to be our children across the country who pay the price for Labour's decision to try and tax private schools if they get into office. It's quite clear to me that it's not just families who are going to be paying the price with £2,000 of extra taxes under the Labour Party. It's going to be our children with larger class sizes right across the country. That, I think, is a horrendous price to pay. Children's education in order to deliver on Labour's ideological obsession.
This is a pool interview, and other broadcasters have asked me to ask about your selection, and we want to ask about it as well. I come back to the question. It looks like a stitch-up. Chairman of the party, shortlist of one, just before nominations close. How is that not an appalling stitch-up and anti-democratic?
Emily Thornberry today has completely admitted that Labour's approach to taxing schools is going to mean larger class sizes for children right across the country, particularly in the state sector. Their children are going to be paying the price for Labour's ideological obsession, with over £2,000 extra on tax for their parents and larger class sizes for children. It's children and families who are going to pay the price under a Labour government.
So you can't justify the way you have been parachuted into Basildon and Billericay. You're not denying it's a stitch-up and it's anti-democratic.
Emily Thornberry today has admitted...
I'm going to stop you now. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You said in an interview earlier this year you were bloody loyal to the North East. What happened to that?
John, I've already answered these questions.
No, you haven't.
Actually, I have.
When?
When I did a Channel 4 News interview last week.
Oh, right, it's one broadcaster, isn't it? Why is the Prime Minister hiding this weekend and not answering any media questions? Is that because of the fiasco over D-Day?
The Prime Minister will be out on the road, I'm sure, over the next few days, fighting for every vote right across the country. I think it's quite clear when you're seeing policies like Labour's VAT on schools, which are going to mean larger class sizes for children, which are going to mean taxes on working families up £2,000. I don't think British families can afford Labour's ideological obsession, and the Prime Minister will keep making that clear throughout the rest of this election campaign.
John Craig there with a grilling interview. Thanks so much. And we've got Sir Liam Fox, as if by magic, joining us. Why don't politicians answer questions?
I don't know. It's so much easier just to answer the question and get it done. But, of course, in elections, everyone wants to make the points that the parties want to have reiterated in front of the electorate. But I think when politicians don't answer questions directly, the public stop listening.
I hope you're going to answer some of our questions then. Where is Rishi Sunak? Maybe we've got you out here, we've got Richard Holden. Where's the Prime Minister? Surely he needs to answer these questions.
Well, the Prime Minister's been out campaigning and he will answer questions. He's been doing interviews. We'll do lots as we get to the manifesto. We're sort of in the phony war of the general election, aren't we? The period before the parties bring out their manifestos. And everyone's scrambling around to say, what shall we talk about in the meantime?
But there is something to talk about in the meantime. Everyone is still talking about his decision to miss the end of D-Day. Wouldn't it be easier?
No, everyone's not talking about that. The media are talking about it. Let me tell you...
So do you think it doesn't matter? But veterans are talking about it.
Out in the country, people are still talking about the issues that matter most to them. And what I'm very worried about, from the reasons I wanted to come on here tonight, was to say the real issue around defence is not around D-Day celebrations. It's around the fact that Vladimir Putin this week is threatening to give ballistic missiles to some of our country's enemies. The fact that Ukraine was firing into Russia today. We are in a national security crisis. We need to talk about the big issues in this election. We need to focus on the fact that we are in a crisis and we are still the government, and we need to be giving clear messages, not just to our own country, but to our allies. These are the serious issues. This is not a cartoon election. It's a real dangerous world we live in, and the public want us to deal with the real issues.
I completely agree that what you're talking about is important, but are you then saying that you think this isn't serious, that the Prime Minister missed the end of D-Day? I mean, would you have done that?
I think he apologised, he said it was wrong. Let's get over it. People make misjudgments. They make judgments during campaigns and they make judgments other times. Let's talk about in defence, what really matters. D-Day was talking about the security of Europe. There is a threat to the security of Europe today.
Optics as well, about being in the photo.
If you think that that's the most important thing at the present time, I think the most important thing is keeping our country safe. I think the most important thing is showing a strong line from NATO. I think the most important thing is that the G7 leaders this week talk about what is a security crisis that's really happening. You know, we've really got that. One of the reasons that voters are not listening in this election is that we're not talking about the big issues. It's who said what, who did what, rather than focusing on the dangers in the world, and ordinary people can see what is happening across Europe. The European elections today, what is Putin doing? Let's focus on what matters, because if we focus on the trivia, the public won't be listening.
I just think it's unfair to call this trivia, because it's not just the media. We've seen veterans speak out about it. I've seen behind the scenes plenty of Conservatives absolutely furious about this. And I think one of the big questions that you could clear up, and maybe that would help things move on, is why he missed it. What was it that was in his diary that meant that he missed it?
I think it was a misjudgment. I think it was a misjudgment of priorities. End of story. I don't think this is something that we should be focusing on. But don't you think just telling people what it was that was in the diary that was... I said it was a misjudgment. He has said that. He apologised. I mean, how long are we going to go on this one issue when there are genuine security and defence issues facing not just our country? We've got the potential changes tonight in the situation in Gaza. Why are we focusing on this one thing over and over again? It's one of the reasons why viewing figures are going down. It's one of the reasons why the public are switching on. Well, compared to previous elections, yes.
OK, fine, we will move on, but I'm not saying this is over for you.
Well, it's over for me. It may not be over for you.
OK. You plan to overhaul welfare. That's what you do want to talk about today. It's not the first time the Tories have promised this, is it? Why didn't it work last time?
Well, it's going to be a constant change, isn't it? We've got an evolving picture. I think that most people have not really understood how much the pandemic affected people, economically, psychologically, in particular. And I think that we now need to be looking at the patterns that have evolved in our society since that. There are two big announcements, I think, that matter on that. One was the announcement on introducing some form of national service to get kids out of what's become, in many ways, a ghettoised mindset, get them into wider society, get them to understand the sort of benefits that young people in a constituency like mine would take for granted, and also get more people back into work. Work is not just an economic issue. It's a social, personal, moral issue. If the only value that you know you've got is what the state gives you to do nothing, how do you know what you could have been to yourself, your family, or your community? And what Mel Stride was talking about today was, how do we help people back into the world of work? Not just because it's good economically, but it's good for people.
OK, so who is it exactly that is receiving benefits now that wouldn't?
Well, we've had a big increase in the non-working population, people not seeking work, but who are not economically active. And I think you have to say there are a myriad of reasons why that's happening. Can we identify them? And can we deal with them? And how do we get people back into that world of work? Because leaving people without the sort of interactions you get in the workplace is to leave people isolated. And we've had a big increase in people working from home. We don't really understand yet the social dynamics of that. We do need to think about it.
I want to ask you about something Nigel Farage said. He said that Rishi Sunak didn't understand our history and our culture. He's been accused of emphasising his immigrant heritage. Do you think that that's a fair accusation?
I heard that. I'm very disappointed with Nigel Farage for saying that, and I'm angry about it. I don't think Nigel Farage is in any way a bad man. I know him quite well. But I think that what he said will be interpreted as meaning you have a British Prime Minister appointed by His Majesty who doesn't understand, quote, our culture because he's of Asian heritage. It's disappointing, but it's dangerous. It brings an element into our politics which we should not have in British politics, and I hope that Nigel Farage will reflect on it, because I think he's a decent person. And I think he owes the Prime Minister and the country an apology.
OK, thanks so much, Sir Liam Fox. Very kind of you to come in on your Sunday evening and speak to us here on The Hub. Well, there have been suggestions from some that Rishi Sunak originally didn't plan to attend D-Day commemorations at all. Reports on Twitter, or X, said the Prime Minister's team had told the French he would skip D-Day altogether. In response to a suggestion by journalist Ian Martin that the Prime Minister attended but left early as a compromise, former Conservative advisor Joe Tanner, who's with us, of course, this evening, said that if what Ian Martin is saying can be disputed, then it needs to be done quickly. Otherwise, we might as well just scrap the campaigns, bring forward polling day and be done with it, and denote what would have been spent on campaigning to veterans. Worth saying. Let's bring in our panel now. Luciana Berger, of course, former Labour MP, and Joe Tanner, former Conservative advisor.
Yep.
That was a hell of a tweet. Worth saying the government, of course, deny that Rishi Sunak was planning on missing the whole of D-Day. How are you feeling now about it all?
I'm still pretty upset about it. And I think, interestingly, I've got a lot of time for Liam Fox. And actually what he was saying there is right. There are big issues in the world that need to be focused on. But then even more important that Rishi Sunak, as the UK Prime Minister, was there with other leaders at that very point, because goodness knows what asides were being said, goodness knows what could have been discussed in those moments at that international commemoration. So I think it almost proves the point that we are facing really difficult, dangerous times. So I think it's only right that the UK not only paid its respects, but also are there for those moments with other world leaders when we should have our seat at that table. We should be present. So I think the bigger point about this is that around the country, Conservative sort of supporters, they are off knocking on doors. The Prime Minister might not be, the Prime Minister might be hiding, but they have to do it. And they're having to have those conversations on the doorstep. Pretty hard to defend when there's no excuse being given.
OK, Luciana, what do you think? Do you think that this is being overhyped? Do you think journalists should still be asking politicians now that he's apologised?
I think it was a devastating decision. I think it was, it was so unbecoming of a Prime Minister or someone who seeks to lead this country at such a historic, momentous event. You know, the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The idea that you wouldn't be there for the entirety of the event is an affront, I think, to the veterans that were there. And we heard from Sir Liam Fox about how it's important to be with world leaders this week. Well, actually, it's those informal moments, those engagements that you have in the run-up that are also important to be cementing those relationships. So that I think it's first and foremost, I think it was really beyond disappointing. It was beyond a gaffe in terms of making that choice, because I've heard there's been lots of blame placed on advisors. Ultimately, it's the decision of the Prime Minister himself in terms of what he does, and that shows such a lack of judgment, I think, that he was not there this week for the entirety of those events.
Yeah, and I think there are some in his own party that agree with you. Thanks so much, both. We will come back to you very soon. You are watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, the parties will launch their manifestos next week. Could they shift the narrative of this election campaign for Rishi Sunak? Labour offer a pledge not to raise income tax, national insurance or VAT, but does that really mean we won't pay more? We'll ask Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reed. After the break, results have started to come in the European Parliament elections. We'll have the latest.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
We'd all fled to London because of the widespread homophobia that there was in our communities, and we didn't expect a Welsh mining community to be any different. all I wanted was to be accepted. So that's all we ever wanted. In those few seconds in the miners' hall in Wales, I was just given that absolute acceptance.
It's an amazing story. So 40 years ago, during the miners' strike, one of the biggest industrial disputes this country ever saw, a group of gay people in London decided that they were going to support the miners. They went out and fundraised, raised money, and decided to twin with a Welsh mining community in South Wales, sent them the money at a time when the country was incredibly homophobic. But despite that, this community accepted them with open arms, and it was the beginning of an amazing friendship and bond that lasts to this day. And this film tells the story of that year and also shows the impact of that story and how it's changed the course of queer rights in this country and had a big impact on LGBT people today.
It's probably true, your observation, that it seemed there were two very different communities. But in fact, through the process of getting to know each other, we found we had an awful lot in common.
Like what?
Well, we were both struggling against a society that was, for our case, it was homophobic. For the miners' community, they were struggling to, you know, in an industrial dispute, they were had a lot of opposition to what they were trying to do, which was to save their jobs. So we were both communities of struggle, communities that were up against it. And coming together, we were able to support one another. Something about solidarity, old-fashioned word, but there was solidarity there.
Well, now the world's second biggest election is happening. Millions of people have taken part in elections to the European Parliament. The votes are being counted. So what happened? Well, the man who knows is our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons. He is in Brussels for us this evening. So we've had the first results in, I think. Adam, what do they tell us?
Yeah, and I have to say, not just in Brussels, but inside the European Parliament. This is the hemicycle where the MEPs will get together when this new Parliament is constituted, and it's already looking like it's going to have a slightly different appearance. Fundamentally, the EPP, the centre-right European People's Party, will still be the biggest political group here. But what's happening on the margins is what's catching the attention. The two biggest countries in Europe, Germany and France, are both showing signs of that rise in far-right political groups that had been anticipated. Let's just talk about Germany. Exit poll came out there first, that the ruling the triple coalition led by Olaf Scholz are going to do terribly. All of those three parties have lost enormous amounts of votes. The CDU-CSU, that party, which lost the last election, is going to win that one. But second will be AfD, the very far-right Alternative for Germany party. That was the first real bombshell of the night. But in the past few minutes, we've had an exit poll from France, and that, I think, has trumped Germany so far as the story of this election, because that poll suggests that Rassemblement National, the party led by Jordan Bardella, that is so associated with Marine Le Pen, who leads it in the National Assembly, that party will get somewhere around 32% of the vote. And Emmanuel Macron, the president, his Renaissance party, has had a stinker. Looks like he's going to get only about 15%. So in other words, Bardella's Rassemblement National will get more than double that of Macron's party. That is potentially seismic. Bardella has already said that Macron needs to dissolve Parliament and call an election. I don't think that's going to happen. But Emmanuel Macron will be speaking to the nation tonight. We were not expecting this speech, and Macron has done this before, but he pulls that lever only when he thinks that there is a problem that he needs to address the nation. That, I think, is the story that the far-right Rassemblement National has done even better than had been predicted.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks so much, Adam Parsons, and I'm sure Sky will be speaking to you later in the evening. Right, Eleni Var-Vitzioti is the correspondent for Greece and Cyprus for the Financial Times. She's reported around Europe and joins me from Athens. Thanks so much for coming on the Hub this evening. I mean, we're seeing fascinating results. Do you think this is, as much as anything else, a kind of anti-establishment change vote, or was that simplifying things?
I think there's a fight for the future and identity of Europe, and which has already started. I think we're going to see a balance of power that is going to shift in major issues like mass migration, energy politics, and other issues, because people seem to want to have a change of politics. As we just heard from Brussels, you have the two biggest countries of the EU, France and Germany. France specifically having a major landslide win for Marine Le Pen's party. Young voters vote for Marine Le Pen. She has been much more moderate than she used to be, but still she's a extreme right party. And then in Germany, you have the second position of AfD, Germany's extreme right party as well. And having also the coalition government, the parties that are in the coalition government in Germany, kind of crashing. So, I mean, we will see a shift in to the right, as I understand, in policies that will be taken in the next 5 years in the European Parliament.
It's really interesting. And I mean, all these parties are often kind of bunched together as right-wing populist parties, as you say, AfD, Marine Le Pen's National Rally, Giorgia Meloni's party. That is a kind of simplification of things, because they are quite distinctive, aren't they?
Exactly. So the question now is, if these parties, these three parties, as you mentioned, which are on the right side, are they going to be able to cooperate? And although they do have common issues like anti-migration and maybe bashing green policies, they do have major differences between them. You have the party where Meloni belongs, the Prime Minister of Italy, which is more Eurosceptic. And then you have Le Pen's party, which is extreme right. So they have to figure out a way, and they are separated also in policies. I mean, Meloni is pro-Ukraine, is sending lots of help. Italy is sending lots of help in Ukraine, while Le Pen is against the war, wants a peace to be made with Russia. So these are issues that are separating the parties. Also, they are different mentality. Meloni is in power, is a prime minister, and she's working in the European system. She's working. She's voting many of the things that the Europeans are proposing, while Meloni is an anti-establishment, wants to change EU from within. So it depends. So in this moment, Meloni is kind of the kingmaker, I can tell you, because if she goes with the center right, with the EPP, which has a majority in the parliament, this will help the EPP. But if she wants to go more extreme, she could be with Le Pen and then push the agenda to the right.
So Giorgia Meloni potentially in a powerful position. Eleni, I'm so sorry. I'd love to talk to you for longer, but because of breaking news, we've been slightly squeezed on the programme. So I'm going to have to say goodbye, but thank you for your insight. It's been really interesting. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, next week is Manifesto Week. Could a flashy policy shift the dial for Rishi Sunak, or could things get even worse? And the view from Shambles Street in York, we find out who's putting fire in voters' imaginations at this election. Welcome back. Well, breaking news in the last hour. One of Israel's most senior politicians, Benny Gantz, has resigned from the war cabinet. Ministers have defended Rishi Sunak as the fallout continues from his early departure from D-Day commemorations. But the Prime Minister himself has not spoken on camera over the weekend. More than 300 million people have voted in the European Parliament, and exit polls suggest big gains for right-wing parties. You can stay up to date with all the goings-on in the election campaign on our digital politics hub by scanning the QR code at the bottom of your screen. All that and much more, just scan the QR code. Well, Labour are to launch their manifesto this week. I spoke to the Shadow Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, a little earlier. Steve Reed, thanks so much for speaking to us this evening. Just to start with, if you don't mind, I'd quite like to play you a interview that Trevor Phillips did this morning with Paul Johnson from the IFS. So I'll just play you a quick clip from his interview.
They don't want to obviously talk about tax increases because that frightens the voters. But they have, as I said, tied themselves to this fiscal rule. Maybe they're just hoping they get lucky, though I have to say, I think on the balance of probabilities, they won't, at least in the first budget, because if anything, the economic forecast that the last budget was based on was pretty optimistic. So what will they do? They're not telling us.
So will you tell us now what you're going to do?
Well, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have been crystal clear all the way through this campaign and way before that. We, as the Labour Party, have no intention to further increase personal taxes, whether that's income tax, VAT, national insurance, on working people, because people are currently paying the highest rates of personal taxation for 70 years, since the end of the Second World War. And we have a cost of living crisis. People simply can't afford to pay any more. Labour's been crystal clear about all the way through this. We have proposals to inject funding into public services where that is required, and we have identified specific tax loopholes that we will close in order to bring that funding in. So closing the non-dom tax loophole, where foreign billionaires resident in this country pay less than the guy that cuts my hair. Closing that loophole will fund 40,000 additional NHS appointments every week. Closing the private school VAT loophole will fund 6,500 additional teachers. Now, these are not easy decisions to take. They're hard decisions, but we'll take them because we know we need to fund failing public services, but we will not further increase personal taxes on working people after the Conservatives landed us with the highest rates for 70 years.
OK, you talked there about two things, non-DOMs and VAT on private schools. The reforms to non-DOM status is expected to raise, I think, £2.6 billion, according to your estimates, and VAT on private schools, £1.7 billion. I'm not saying that's not nothing, but in the grand scheme of things, reforming the NHS, boosting public services, the eye-watering sums you have to pay in compensation to people like postmasters, people impacted by the infected blood inquiry. I mean, those are just a few things. The money that you're talking about is not going to be able to pay for that.
The reason that we as a country are facing these problems with collapsing public services but high rates of tax is because the Conservatives have failed for 14 years to grow the economy. They crashed the economy under Liz Truss. That made things even worse. So growing the economy is going to be key to getting the funding in for the future that we will require. I'll give you one more example.
Can I just say, didn't Liz Truss learn the hard way? You're talking about growing the economy. Didn't she learn the hard way about how dangerous it is to talk about growing the economy without saying how you're actually going to pay for it?
Well, I was just going to come on and say how we're going to pay for it, but it is worth pointing out that Rishi Sunak, who incidentally hasn't been seen on national media for the last 48 hours, Rishi Sunak has so far ratcheted up £71 billion of unfunded commitments in this general election campaign alone. That is more than the level of unfunded commitments Liz Truss tried to force through in her kamikaze budget that crashed the economy and sent interest rates and mortgages and prices in the shops spiralling. The example I was going to give you was actually the windfall tax on the energy and gas giants who are making profits above and beyond what they anticipated making, billions of pounds worth of profits. A windfall tax on that will help establish GB Energy, which will create good jobs up and down this country and help us take back control of our energy so that we can harness the power of wind, waves, solar and nuclear and cut people's energy bills. That puts money in people's pockets as quickly as we can do it. It also makes industry more profitable so that they can invest that money in growing the economy. So we grow the economy. That is how we will generate the revenues we need for the future. For now, we have been crystal clear, no increases in personal taxation on working people because the Conservatives have put it up too much already. Every single commitment we've made is costed and funded, and we don't need to raise taxes beyond that.
OK, can I confirm that, like the Conservatives, there will be 3 years of freezing income tax allowances amounting to an £11 billion tax rise?
As I understand it, that's what Rachel and Keir have committed to, and there'll be more said when the manifesto is published, which I believe is in the next few days.
More taxes.
People are not going to be paying more income tax, VAT or national insurance if Labour is elected. And the reason is the Conservatives have put it up to the highest rate for 70 years. People can't take any more. We've made specific pledges.
It's frozen. It's a stealth tax.
These are taxes that the Conservatives have increased. That's how they increased them. If you remember the last budget, they pretended they were cutting tax when really they were increasing tax. Labour won't be increasing tax. We've made specific commitments that are costed and fully funded, and that is how we will get the funding, the first injection of cash into our public services failing under this Conservative government. Education, national health services, and energy. Very big commitments.
Are the thresholds frozen or not then?
There will be no increase in the taxes that working people are paying.
That's not my question, though.
It does answer your question. There will be no increases in the taxes people are paying. I can't make it clearer than that. We will not be charging people more taxes than they're currently paying. We won't be putting up taxes on working people because they're already high enough after the Conservatives put them up 26 times since the last general election, having said they wouldn't.
So the headline rate doesn't change, but what about the threshold?
We have no intention of changing those. There are no plans. There's no need to change those because everything that in our manifesto, as you'll see when it's published in a few days' time, is fully costed and fully funded by closing specific tax loopholes like the non-dom tax loophole and like the private school VAT loophole. There is no need to increase taxes beyond that. There are no spending commitments that would require it.
OK, thank you so much. That's all we've got time for. Really appreciate you coming back on the Politics Hub this evening.
Thank you.
OK, let's bring the panel back in. Luciana, I mean, it feels like Labour coming under quite a lot of scrutiny now because it looks likely, according to the polls, they're going to be in power soon and there's not much money left.
I think Labour has been laser focused on this issue right the way through. Ever since Rachel Reeves was made Shadow Chancellor, she has made it her mission and her business to ensure that nothing that the Labour Party put forward was anything other than fully funded and fully costed. And why is that important? Because, economic credibility is absolutely key to any party that wishes to govern this country. It's absolutely key for any party that wishes to be in control, and it's one of the key areas that the general public look to. So she, as the Shadow Chancellor, and the team around her, and all the wider Shadow Cabinet have known right from the very beginning that there is no chance of Labour winning the election unless it is laser focused. And I think it's really important that we've heard today from the Labour Party about this triple lock, that there will be no increases in those personal taxations, in VAT, income tax and national insurance, certainly because that's a really, really clear message that the country needs to hear and that it's guaranteed for the next 5 years.
OK, there are going to be difficult decisions ahead, though, aren't there, Jo, do you think?
Yeah, and I
think he addressed that, I guess.
Well, I think Luciana's right, but I think that the challenge is, I mean, if they've learned, if anybody's learned anything from what's happened over the last few years, is that there's been a ton of stuff that nobody expected to happen. So it's also extremely brave to be saying we're not going to be doing things, given that, we've even got sort of avian flu is knocking about out there now. Like, there are things happening in the world that are completely out of government's control. And so this sort of, we have an iron cast guarantee, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. It is risky. I think ultimately, I remember back to Keir's speech actually at party conference last year, and he sort of said, you know, there's some difficult stuff we have to talk to you about, and he was quite bold in being sort of trying to be realistic about the world ahead and the sort of economic outlook. So I think Rachel has been very clear about this sort of fiscal responsibility sort of message, but I do think it is a risk generally that you're saying you're not going to do something, and actually whether there's pressure and you might have to, it could still come back and bite them in the long run.
Okay. And Luciana, I need to ask you, because obviously you rejoined the party because you felt that anti-Semitism had been stamped out under Keir Starmer. Can I ask how did you find the handling of the Diane Abbott case, and is she the sort of person that you think should be in the party?
Well, this is a changed Labour Party. The Labour Party no longer resemble the party that I joined when I left it at in advance of what was the last election in 2019. It's to Keir Starmer's credit and the team around him that they have changed the party, and this is a changed Labour Party at every single level, and this is a party that is ready for government. In terms of all the work that's been done around selections, that's been done by the National Executive Committee again, which is a very thorough committee. It's a committee that has been doing lots to ensure that they've done everything necessary as prescribed by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and we've seen that right up until this general election.
Do you feel comfortable with everything that's happened with Diane Abbott?
Yeah, so Diane Abbott went through a process and the process was concluded in advance of this general election.
Okay, thanks so much. We will come back to you both. We've got lots to cover. Let's take a quick look, though, at what else has been happening on the campaign trail today. The SNP leader, John Swinney, was campaigning in Paisley today. He said that the Conservatives' Douglas Ross had serious questions to answer about the reports that he used his parliamentary expenses to travel for his second job as a football linesman. Mr Ross says he only ever claimed expenses related to his role as an MP. The Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, is still recovering from tennis on Saturday, but he told Sky's Trevor Phillips earlier the policies in his party's manifesto are fully funded, claiming that's not the case for other parties.
On the care policy, free personal care and making sure we've got more care workers by paying them properly, we've said we would reverse the Conservatives' tax cut for big banks, and that would raise £4.3 billion. When I talked about mental health for young people and children, we said we'd increase the digital service taxes on the social media giants, the likes of Amazon and Google as well. So I think it's, unlike the other parties, we've actually already begun to show very clearly where the money from for our health and care policies would come from.
Right, let's hear from the shambles now, not the Conservative election campaign, but the market in York. Fraser Maud has been to find out who gets the artisan cheese and fire juggler vote.
The ancient city of York has been under Roman rule, it's been under Viking rule in the past, but who do people want to rule us after the general election? I'm here on the shambles, which a lot of people say is the current state of British politics.
It's a bit of a shambles at the moment.
What do you think, everyone? Can we do it? Yeah! What's your take on it?
A load of shambles, quite literally.
I'm a Conservative, but I'm not quite sure that at the moment that I'd want to vote for any party. So that's the situation in my head at the present moment.
It seems a predetermined outcome. Basically, one side committing constant errors and the other side not doing anything.
I would think Rishi Sunak will be something that's going to crumble easily, so perhaps a Cheshire. I think Keir Starmer's probably going to be something boring and bland, so probably a supermarket red Leicester.
It would be good to see something come out of this that moves things forward for everybody, but we'll see.
The view there from the shambles in York. Well, we will speak to our panel again in just a moment, but first, still to come on the Politics Hub. Remember this?
Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. We are offering a long-term solution for the sustainability of social care for the future.
Could Rishi Sunak's fortunes be about to change with his manifesto launch? Or could things get even worse? We're looking ahead to the manifesto next week.
Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we're going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. Now, freedom! There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, had a rare day off today, very well deserved. But there's no such thing as gardening leave during a general election campaign. We managed to persuade him to send us a little update on the big moments to look out for next week.
So you've even followed me to my home. Thanks, guys. I've had to replace my producer with my 9-year-old daughter. My son, 12-year-old son, is the cameraman. Never mind, you want to know about the biggest things on the election trail next week. Well, it's manifesto week, so it's the Liberal Democrats on Monday, the Tories on Tuesday, Greens on Wednesday, and then Labour on Thursday. It's the big Battle for Number 10 Sky event on Wednesday in Grimsby as well. Big question of the week when it comes to polling. Could we get Reform eking up closer to the Tories' figure in those opinion polls as they go through the week? And when will we see the Prime Minister again? It's 48 hours at time of mowing since we had that encounter in a playground on Friday about D-Day. As far as we can tell, he's not done a TV interview since. That has to change. Anyway, this grass isn't going to mow itself, so I'll see you on the telly tomorrow.
Sam Coates there, coming to us live from his back garden, not live. But Joe, is this the week that Rishi Sunak can turn it all around and have a enormous turn in the polls and win the general election?
I think that's probably stretching it a bit. I don't think that's very likely. I think the only thing that the manifesto launch does do is it enables a conversation about what the proposals are from the parties. It's the start of the proper scrutiny as opposed to the, we think you're going to do this, you say you're going to do that, you know, this sort of yeebar stuff that goes on. So I think there is a bit of focusing now on really the detail in terms of what those proposals are, what they mean for people. Because there are lots of people out there that feel that they're not hearing anything that's related to them. And so actually, you know, if people are interested in the NHS, if they're interested in schools, if they're interested in defence, there's going to be a bit more meat on the bone. So it's important. I don't think it's going to turn things around, though. Let's be realistic.
I mean, Luciana, there are 4 weeks left. We've seen how easily gaffes can happen. You'll remember we played earlier the John Prescott famous punch moment. I think that was an election campaign. But everyone, that's it, and everyone remembers that. Is there a degree of nervousness, do you think? Here we go, we can play it to you now. Do you think there's a degree of nervousness still in Labour ranks that they want to get this Ming vase across the line?
I think no one's complacent. I think every vote matters, and certainly when I've been out campaigning, no one is taking anything for granted. The only poll that matters is what happens in July.
Spoken like a true politician.
No, but it is.
This
is not a science, and we've got a number of weeks ahead, and especially when you speak to candidates, they're the first to kind of be nervous about what the future holds. But actually, I've been on the doorstep over the last few weeks, and Labour does have an offer. People do have something to talk about in terms of what Labour's said so far. It's going to be really exciting to hear even more. I think that's going to be in stark contrast to the only thing that the public have really had from the Conservatives is Rishi's own test that he set himself at the start of last year, which he's failed on most of. And yes, we wait and see what else comes on Tuesday. I think that will be, overshadowed by the where's Rishi? We haven't seen him for 48 hours. I think it's actually a disgrace. And it's an affront to the public that we've seen these static photographs. This is someone who wishes to lead the country and be Prime Minister, and they can't even have an interview.
Thank you both so much. It's been a wonderful panel this evening. I've really enjoyed it. 24 days until the election. See you next time.